And they said they made a gathering, a thick gathering. He was in the middle of it. All these people around him, defending him. But then, in some narrations, the Muslims were chanting, Ahadun Ahad. Ahad is like one, meaning they're speaking about Allah. And if you remember, Bilal radiallahu anhu was the one when he was tortured, he would say, Ahadun Ahad. And the Muslims asked him, why did you say Ahadun Ahad? He said, I used to say a lot of things besides Ahadun Ahad. But I noticed that Ahad made them upset the most. So I kept saying it the most. Even though they were torturing him, he still wanted to upset them the most. So, in some narration, the Muslims kept saying, Ahadun Ahad, chopping down the trees around Abu Jahl, meaning the people, one by one. Then, we have an interesting story narrated by Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who said that suddenly in the battle, he found himself on his right and on his left, two young youth. Now, there are many narrations of this story in particular, but we'll take the most authentic of it. And there's some very long versions of it, and they all have weaknesses in them. So we'll take the short one, and it's the most authentic. That Abdurrahman ibn Auf says, he's describing himself, that he found himself between two young men in the middle of the battle. That in one narration they were around 14 years old, the oldest one of them. So he said that made him insecure. And if you look at the other narrations, you'll see that made him feel insecure. Imagine you're in an army and you're outnumbered 3-1, and you look to your right and there's a 14-year-old with a sword, and you look to your left, there's one younger than him with a sword. Makes you feel like, we're in trouble, you know. So he said that made him feel insecure. So then one of them whispered to him, says, Uncle, show me Abu Jahl. He says, my son, what do you want with him? He said, I have sworn to Allah that if I see him, I will kill him or die trying. This is a young man. And then the other said the same, show me Abu Jahl. So then he said, but he was whispering it to him, he didn't want the other one to hear. He wanted to be the first one to kill Abu Jahl. So then he says, I wouldn't have been more pleased if I was standing between two other men besides them. I was proud to be standing between these two other men. I would have been prouder if there were any other two. He felt very proud. He says, then I pointed to him. He showed them where he was. And he says they darted like two hawks at him, hitting him until he died. And some narrations describe the difficulty they had. They made an agreement, one would strike the horse. Once Abu Jahl fell, he was huge and fat. The young boy stood on top of him. He felt that if he struck his stomach, he wouldn't kill him. So he struck him at the neck. In any case, they went to him and jumped and hit him until he was dead. And then they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they announced that they had killed Abu Jahl. And he looked at their swords and he saw the blood on both swords, so he believed that both of them killed Abu Jahl. And this is one of the examples we were talking about, how in the middle of battle they go to announce something like this and show their swords to the Prophet ﷺ. So then the names of those boys were Mu'adh ibn Amr, and Ibn Amr ibn al-Jamuh, the famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ, and Mu'awwidh ibn al-Afra, and he was killed later on in the Battle of Badr. So then when Abu Jahl fell, and he was the one that was rallying up the army of the Quraysh, the mushrikeen, they just scattered. That kind of broke the army. So then it's narrated that later Abdullah ibn Mas'ud goes and he's looking for Abu Jahl, and he finds him and there's a little bit of breath in him. And we look at this stubborn kafir. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud puts his foot on his chest. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was a very thin, very skinny man. But it's like Allah decreed that 3 of the smallest people would attack and kill one of the biggest enemies of Islam, Abu Jahl. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was very thin. He put his foot on the chest of Abu Jahl, and Abu Jahl, this stubborn kafir, is still saying, who was victorious in this battle? He's asking. So then Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tells him, Allah and His Messenger. Then he asked him, have you tasted the humiliation from Allah, you enemy of Allah? And he says to him, and how did He humiliate me? He says, is there any man stronger than the one who is killed by his own people? My own people killed me. So he's used that as a thing to show his strength. Then he looked at him, he peered at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He says, aren't you the little shepherd boy in Mecca? And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud delivered him some blows and he killed him. There are other narrations of the killing of Abu Jahl, but this is the most authentic of them. One is long, where Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tries to take his head off and he's not able to. Then Abu Jahl tells him, won't you take my dagger and then start from the right side of my neck, and that way you'll kill me. And But this is the most authentic, so we'll stay with that. But I just want to mention it so that as we're reading books of seerah and so on, we'll find different narrations of stories. But always look in the footnotes, you'll see they'll mention the sahih from the da'if. Likewise, one of the other leaders of the Quraysh that were killed was Umair ibn Khalaf, and he was one of their leaders. And he was a good friend of Abdurrahman ibn Auf. When Abdurrahman ibn Auf would go to Mecca, he would meet him there and let him stay with him and so on. So when he saw him captured, Abdurrahman ibn Auf dropped what was with him and he started walking with Umair ibn Khalaf. Umair ibn Khalaf was the man who tortured Bilal radiallahu anhu, if you remember the famous story. So when Bilal saw this, he said, Umayyah, the head of kufr, if he's safe today, then may I not be safe? He must be hurt today. So he started to gather the Ansar. Umayyah, and then they started to gather around him. And even though he was captured, they attacked him. And even though in a narration, an authentic narration, that Abdurrahman ibn Auf told him to kneel down and he covered him to try to protect him. And yet they still killed him. And this also shows that it's permissible that some of the equivalent of today's war criminals can be killed. Even though they have been taken as prisoners, they can still be killed. So in the end of the battle then, 70 of the mushrikeen are dead and 70 are captured. So that's 140 losses for the Quraysh. And 14 of the Muslims are martyred. We have the story of Haritha ibn Suraqa, who was standing guard for the Prophet ﷺ. And a stray arrow comes out of the army of the Quraysh, going all the way straight to Haritha ibn Suraqa and kills him. So then his mother comes to the Prophet ﷺ and she says, O Messenger of Allah, tell me about Haritha. If he is in Jannah, I will be patient. If he's martyred, I'll be patient. Now why is she asking the Prophet ﷺ this? Because he didn't take part in the battle. He's just standing guard and a stray arrow comes to him. And then she says, but if not, meaning if he's not in Jannah, then Allah will see what I'll do, meaning how I'm going to wail and cry. So then the Prophet ﷺ tells her, woe unto you, are you bereft of your son? Those are wonderful gardens, and your son has attained the highest garden in paradise. This is just one of the guards, the highest garden in paradise. Not to mention those who dive into the thick of battle. And in this battle, we saw relatives against relatives, tribesmen against tribesmen, father against son. An example of father against son is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When his son, Abdullah, during the battle of Badr, was not a Muslim. He became Muslim after Badr. And when he became Muslim, he told his father, he said, O father, I would see you during the battle of Badr and avoid meeting with you and hide from you. And then his father said to him, by Allah, if I had seen you, I would have killed you. No allegiance to anyone but Allah and His Messenger. And on that day, there was no father, there was no son, it was just believer and unbeliever. Then we have the example of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who made sure that he killed Al-As ibn Hisham ibn al-Mughira, who was his uncle. He made sure he killed his uncle. They asked him why. He said, so that Allah knows that there is no love in my heart except to the people of obedience, meaning obedience to Allah, and the people of Iman. This is the example given by Umar. Likewise, there was a man by the name of Abu al-Bukhtari, and the Prophet ﷺ had, if you remember, given specific orders that he should not be killed, because he was from Banu Hashim and they were compelled, they were forced to come to the battle. But the story of Abu al-Bukhtari, he was killed eventually, and the Prophet ﷺ had given instructions not that he shouldn't be killed. So one of the Sahaba came, and when he saw him, he didn't come from the side where he was. He went around to the other side to attack someone near him. So Abu al-Bukhtari asked him, what made you do that? And he told him the Prophet ﷺ gave us instructions not to kill you. So then Abu al-Bukhtari took advantage of this, and he kept running after this Sahabi, swinging at him, trying to kill him. So he had no choice but to defend himself and to kill him. And then when he said that to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ forgave him, because he's defending himself and he couldn't just let him kill him because he was not supposed to be killed. Then likewise, we said one of the mushrikeen, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, who went out in the first duels and he was killed at the beginning of the battle. But his son, Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, he was there in the battle and he witnessed this. And then at the end, There are narrations that when he saw his father in the pit, that's where they threw all the dead of the mushrikeen, the Prophet ﷺ saw a different look in his face, but he asked him and he did not deny that his father got what he deserved. There was also another incident. One of the muhajirin, the immigrants, Mus'ab ibn Umair, and he saw his brother. One of the Ansar had captured his brother, who was one of the mushrikeen. And when he saw him, he told him to tighten that knot on his brother, tighten the knot, because the prisoner's mother is wealthy, and she'll give him a handsome ransom. So she'll make sure that he ties him well and he doesn't escape from him. So then his brother, his name is Abu Aziz, he started to plead with him that, through family ties and we're brothers, and then